Welcome into another episode of Always Talkin Ball. I'm your host, Tyler Noe, alongside Lance Barton, ready to kick off the college football regular season with all of you. That's right. No more Saturdays without college football until the Saturday after the semifinals. Week 0 is finally here. But tonight, we are finally unveiling our preseason top 12 and our CFP predictions. So stay tuned later on the episode for those. Also, if you're not already, make sure to follow us on all social media, all your streaming platforms, YouTube, etc., and make sure to subscribe. And don't forget, head over to homefieldapparel.com. They're going to get you ready for the start of the season by getting you some amazing new shirts, hats, jackets, whatever you might want. And what we can get you is 15% off of whatever you order on that entire site. It's as easy as typing in promo code ATB15 at checkout. That's homefieldapparel.com, promo code ATB15 for 15% off. Man, I think we're just super ready for the season to start. And we know all of you guys are just sick of hearing about team previews and whatnot. But Lance, you got a couple headlines to get us kicked off here before we get to our preseason rankings. So hit us with them.
Yeah, man, I was checking out Greg McElroy's show the other day, and he had on Colin Cowherd. And I just thought that there was a great point that Cowherd brought up, and was a great analogy. He was talking about USC, and if you know anything about Colin Cowherd, he is as plugged in as anybody into the USC football program. He loves college football. Obviously, talks a lot of NFL on his show, but he does talk a lot of college football as well. He's a fan just like all of us, but he is as plugged in with Lincoln Riley and that USC football program as anybody in sports media. And he had a great analogy talking about just the Lincoln Riley experience so far at USC and what happened last year and then USC this year. So what he was talking about was, he said that the analogy he used was Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers with the Green Bay Packers. What he was talking about was that when LaFleur got to Green Bay as a young head coach, that offense was Aaron Rodgers' offense. And there was a lot of well-known things talked about how that Rodgers a lot of times wouldn't even listen to LaFleur and would kind of do his own thing and would improvise and do his own thing on the field and call his own plays, etc. Not saying that Caleb Williams was doing that, but his point was that 2 years ago, Caleb Williams, year 1 at USC, that was more Lincoln Riley's offense. And they had a lot more weapons, etc. Last year was more so of just Caleb Williams running around, improvising, and playing backyard football. And this year, with this USC team, with Miller Moss, this is going to be Lincoln Riley's offense. This is Lincoln Riley's team this year. And we all know what a great offensive play caller that Riley is. And the analogy he uses this year with Lincoln Riley and Miller Moss was like last year with Green Bay Packers head coach Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. And you saw that was Matt LaFleur's offense with the Packers. This will be Lincoln Riley's offense this year with USC. And like it has been most years dating back to his times at Oklahoma and then year 1 at the USC, at USC like 2 years ago. And obviously last year, Caleb Williams had to do a lot of improvising because of how poor that offensive line was, etc. But it'll be less backyard football and more of USC and all of those weapons playing within the Lincoln Riley system, which will be interesting to see against Big Ten teams. What are your thoughts on that, Tyler, and that analogy?
Yeah, I can't recall who said it, but I read that somewhere that this, maybe a tweet somewhere that, this is going to be more like Lincoln Riley's offense. So I'm sure Cowherd stole that from someone. But yeah, it's, it remains to be seen. I mean, he's the one who brought over Caleb Williams from Oklahoma. It's just, Williams was in that offense for 3 years. So, I mean, Cowherd's going to suspend it however is in favor for USC. I mean, he's a USC homer. We get that. I am excited to see kind of how they look, I guess, especially that first game against LSU. And LSU's defense, that we've said, should be improved. But Moss and those wide receivers should have some open throwing lanes for sure.
Yeah.
A couple times throughout the night. So we'll be able to see some of that offense a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Lincoln Riley's ever really been the problem there. It's his hiring decisions, obviously Alex Grinch with the defensive coordinator. So, yeah, it remains to be seen, but I'm excited to watch Miller Moss and see what they can do.
Yeah, and he brought up another good point about the perimeter weapons at USC and all the speed, etc. What that's going to look like against the Big Ten teams they play. And I know we've been kind of a little lower on USC, and so is most of the college sports media in general. With a win total of 7.5. I mean, obviously, not too many people are that high on them. Again, I know the Cowherd is a USC homer, but he made a good point by saying there's really only 2 games on that schedule that you can look at and say they're not winning that game. And LSU would probably, I say they're not winning, but like it's going to be interesting just to see what Lincoln Riley and USC is going to be like on the perimeter weapons overall against the schedule that they play. And again, speaking of Cowherd, a guest that he had on here recently was none other than Urban Meyer. And no matter what you think of Urban Meyer, some things that happened with, when he went to the Jaguars and the NFL, et cetera. I mean, obviously the dude was a heck of a coach at the college football level, and he absolutely knows college football. And he is, again, plugged in with a lot of different programs. He goes and watches practices. He watches film. He talks to a lot of these coaches and consults with a lot of them. He said something interesting on Cowherd's show the other day when they were talking about the Big Ten that, again, we are all kind of like buying the hype of Matt Rule year 2 at Nebraska. And Meyer, like unprompted on his own, brought up the part of like that he has personally been to Nebraska practices and talked to a lot of folks that have seen their practices, program, etc. And he is very high on this Nebraska team and said that they just look completely different than the Nebraska teams that you've seen in the last decade, as far as on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And really, the perimeter weapons are a lot better than what they've been. And we've talked about that a lot on our previous episodes, that this Nebraska team with the perimeter weapons that they do have, multiple tailbacks, obviously a very highly, talented, young, unproven, but talented freshman quarterback. Was just interesting to hear Meyer kind of unprompted bring up Nebraska and like his love for the Huskers this year.
Yeah, whenever you hear Urban Meyer praise a team, that's pretty solid. Like you said, I mean, despite what he is as a person or whatever, he knows ball.
Yep.
And man, I think that Nebraska, Virginia Tech, some other teams like that we've kind of talked about all off season, who are trying to make a little bit of a comeback and stuff, especially Nebraska.
Yep.
Aside from the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Oregons and the Ohio States and the Notre Dames and all that, those teams are like the ones I'm most forward to looking and watching, and especially that Nebraska Week 2 game at Colorado, home against Colorado. That's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good barometer to see kind of how they bounce back from that beating they took from the Buffaloes last year. So yeah, I mean, when Urban Meyer speaks about ball, everybody better listen up. And again, we said it on our Big Ten episode last week. We both were on the Nebraska over win total, and again, Urban Meyer said it. You better get on it quick before the season starts.
Yeah, I agree. And again, speaking of Urban Meyer, like where he used to coach down in Gainesville, the Florida Gators, they're a team that people talk about a lot this offseason, mostly because they've got one of the toughest schedules in probably college football history. Definitely the toughest schedule this year in the entire country. We gave them out on our SEC win totals episode. You can go check that out. Well, we both gave out Florida over 4.5. But some fall camp intel coming out was that people that have seen this team practice and seen their scrimmages. Graham Mertz, he looks like whatever he is, 5th, 6th year, whatever quarterback. He looks like that. He's year 2 in the system. The growth and the leadership, etc. They said it just looks different. He looks different. He seems so much more comfortable. That the offense in general with Trey Wilson at receiver, you saw what he looked like last year as a freshman, y'all. This dude is as electric, and this is not like an exaggeration. He's as electric as anybody in the country with the ball in his hands. That receiving group in general is apparently turning a lot of heads down at fall camp this year in Gainesville for the Gators. There was some stuff coming out that apparently the right side of the offensive line looks a little little testy. But overall, again, Graham Mertz and the weapons on offense, and then the defense. Austin Armstrong in year 2, that apparently the defense is playing much faster. They're thinking less. Again, it's year 2. And that last year was a completely new system for the quarterback and Graham Mertz, for a lot of those young freshmen that were getting to play on both sides of the ball, and then Austin Armstrong's first year as a new defensive coordinator. It's now year 2 in that system. So inevitably, some guys are probably going to be playing faster in general to begin with and not thinking as much, and that apparently is what's going on in Gainesville. So if you're a Florida fan, if you have any optimism whatsoever about the Gators, I know everybody's optimistic in fall camp going into a season, but that's some good stuff that you're hearing, especially with week 1 when they get that huge game against the Canes in the Swamp right out of the gate.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that I'm not a Gator hater anymore. On August 31st, I hope they don't make me and you look like idiots for buying into them. Again, their win total's 4.5. They're not preseason ranked. You wouldn't expect a team with 4.5 win total to be preseason ranked, but again, I think this is a top 25 team just on the field of play, not factoring in their schedule.
And odds makers don't necessarily disagree, because a team with a win total of 4.5, when they're playing a team that a lot of people have picked to either win the ACC or make a run in the ACC, make a run at the college football playoff in Miami, that line right now is flirting around between -2.5 Miami or -3.
Yeah.
So again, that Miami team playing a team like Florida with only a win total of 4.5. Odds makers in Vegas tell you what they think of the Gators too in that spot.
And I think I saw somewhere Florida's got an insane home opener winning streak. Like it's in the 30s, like 39 straight or something like that.
Yeah, you saw what they did against Cam Rising in Utah a couple years ago. That team that won the Pac-12 championship, Cam Rising in Utah.
Yeah.
So, no, man, we're higher on Florida than most. We're not sitting there picking them to win the SEC or go to the playoff or something like that. I think you gave them out at going 6-6, making a bowl game. I'm with you. Yeah. 6-6, 7-5, but we both, as of right now, kind of lean towards Florida winning that game in the Swamp week 1.
Yeah. Okay. You got anything else for us?
No, man, that's it. We could go through teams all over the place, but that was just some that just kind of caught my eye when prepping here for the old episode.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's finally time. I know we've been teasing it for a long time now, but ATB Top 12 is back. We've been doing 12 teams since before the 12-team playoff came out. We've been doing 12 teams since last year and kind of getting everybody prepped for what those top 12 rankings should look like. I think the CFP, the College Football Playoff, announced their schedule. They're going to start November 6th or whatever that day is, that first week in November, and kind of lead all the way up to the selection committee. But we got our top 12.
Yeah, this should be exciting for everybody, because there's no reason for any of you to really look at the AP poll when you could look at the old ATB poll.
Exactly. So we each did our rankings, and we went out past 12 for tiebreaker purposes. But how we're going to do this, we're going to start with number 1, and how we did our own rankings, and then we have an Always Talkin Ball consensus ranking, and it's just averaged out. So if I have someone number 2 and Lance has a number 4, obviously their average is 3, and so they'll be slotted in accordingly. But I think we can both agree on right now. I went back and forth all off season. I think I told you back in March or April or whenever that was that I was pretty high on Ohio State, and I thought they might be the top top team in the country, but we both agreed on number 1. It's the Georgia Bulldogs and Kirby Smart.
Yeah, man. I'm obviously I think everybody just about is going to have either Georgia or Ohio State at 1 and 2. But we talked about it when these two teams, if they were to play week 1, and I don't know how you necessarily did your rankings, but I did mine based off of right now. If these teams played each other on a neutral field, who I think wins the game? Who would I favor over whoever to win the game? And I just think right now the difference in that game is I just don't know that I know Ohio State, Jim Knowles' defense is legit, but one team has Carson Beck at quarterback and the other has Will Howard. I just think that's the difference. I mean, I'm not knocking Will Howard. I think he's going to be good in that Chip Kelly, Ryan Day system. But Carson Beck, I think, is going to light it up again for the Dogs. And I just think at the end of the day, in that game, if they played week 1, that Carson Beck and that offense and those receivers and the multiple backs that Georgia's going to have, I think that would obviously Kirby Smart's defense can do more than put up a fight and hold their own against Ohio State. So I lean in that spot right now, Georgia, because of the difference between I think the defense is a borderline a wash. So I would lean towards Georgia because of Carson Beck and that offense.
Well, you mentioned almost everybody is going to have Ohio State at number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Not me. I had them number 1 in March or April, like I mentioned, and knocked them all the way down to 3. I've actually got your boy, Dan Lanning, and the Oregon Ducks as my number 2 team. And I know you had him at number 4. So anxious to get your take on him. I just think, again, like quarterback position, I know he's kind of, has the injury moniker, kind of like Connor Wegman a little bit. Like Dylan Gabriel's a good quarterback, right? And he's a good college quarterback. I don't know how well he's going to do in the pros. Wegman's probably a better pro prospect for sure, but Dylan Gabriel's a seasoned college quarterback.
Yep.
And I just trust him in that offense that Will Stein runs. I trust him more than Will Howard at the moment. And I think that, man, you could put Ole Miss is up there, but Oregon, Ohio State, they're pass catchers, they're skill position guys. I mean, they're right next to each other. Like Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, you got the running backs back there. I mean, they just he's got a plethora of options. And I think the defense is good. But I just think right now on a neutral field, I would take Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. At the end of the season, on a neutral field, possibly in Indianapolis, maybe my mind might change. You have to stay tuned to see my college football playoff projections. So I went Oregon number 2. You mentioned Ohio State number 2 already. And so I had them number 3. So we slotted them in the number 2 on the Always Talkin Ball top 12. So anxious to get your thoughts here on Oregon, who you had number 4, behind your Alabama Crimson Tide. That's going to shock absolutely no one that Lance favored Kalen DeBoer over Dan Lanning on a neutral field.
That's fine, and you just hit one of the points right there. I love Dan Lanning. I do. I've been preaching his word since we've started doing a podcast a little over a year ago. Huge Lanning fan. But again, the dude it's just a fact. He's a G. He's a great football coach. He recruits his butt off. Players obviously love the guy. Most fans love the guy. He'd be awesome to play for. All those things are true. He's a superstar in the making. But he hasn't won the bigger games yet. He hasn't. And this year's roster and this year's team is definitely legit. You made a great point recently by saying that as far as teams like the least amount of like maybe any question marks, weaknesses, etc., Oregon probably has an answer more so than other teams overall. They're, in my opinion, these top 4 teams that we've got, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, there's not a ton that separate these teams. But I'm sorry, I'm just not ready to sit here and say that Alabama, with the talent that they've got and the roster that they've got, with Kalen DeBoer coaching them, that I just all of a sudden is going to give Oregon the benefit of the doubt. I'm just not.
Okay, so in the offseason, if Dan Lanning took the Alabama job and then Kalen DeBoer took the Oregon job, where would these teams be ranked?
Ooh, that's one of the best questions you asked me on this whole podcast.
It just all come down to head coaches.
But no, not necessarily. No, it is but look, it is a huge thing. Yes, it is. We saw what DeBoer did with, honestly, significantly less talent overall than Oregon. I'm not talking about Michael Penix and those receivers. No, but overall.
They didn't have the best offensive line or anything like that. So.
No, he outcoached the piss out of Dan Lanning. Twice. He did. He just did. He just flat out did. Yeah. DeBoer did. And he did. You talked about it last year a ton. So again, now with Alabama's roster, we just think all of a sudden now that we just give Oregon the benefit of the doubt. I just don't. And that's fine. Say the fandom in me, whatever. But when you look at Alabama's roster and Oregon's roster, yes, Oregon is now extremely comparable to these teams that we're talking about. They are. But I'm not just going to sit here and say that Oregon's roster is unshadow of a doubt better than Alabama's, because it's not. And I don't think that Dan Lanning gets the benefit of the doubt over Kalen DeBoer. Hell no. After what DeBoer has done to him and clapped those cheeks for him the last few years. I don't think that at all. So, yeah, I had Alabama at 3 and Oregon at 4. And by the way, these rankings, it's amazing how people are going to get so mad that you've got the, like, how dare you rank Oregon as low as 4? When's the last time they've had a preseason ranking this high? I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but it's been a while. So,
True.
yeah. By the way, I'm going to tip of the hat. That's a great question about the Lanning and DeBoer thing. And I actually did not answer that question. So I
needed to be asked.
I will answer it. If you flip-flopped the coaches of these rosters, I mean, I'll be honest. I probably would say that because DeBoer has beaten Lanning like he has, et cetera, it'd be tough to say, but I would agree. What your point on it is, I would agree that I would probably have to lean towards Oregon because of that.
That's exactly what our consensus poll did. So we had Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, and Alabama 4. So I had Alabama down at 4th position. 5th and 6th, we were flip-flopped here. And I'll be honest, I used my boy Kelly Ford and his power ratings and just put Texas at 5 for us. But we had Texas and Ole Miss 5-6. You had Ole Miss ahead of Texas. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think if Ole Miss and Texas lined up on a neutral field week 1, I think Ole Miss would win that football game. I think that Ole Miss's starting roster overall, with what they've got, what they already had coming back with Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, etc. on offense, what they already had coming back on the defensive side of the ball, and then what they added on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and then adding Juice Wells and a couple of backs on offense. I just think here's a great example of this. If you took Ole Miss's, like, just put their starting roster in Texas uniforms, I'm going to ask you the question. What do you think Texas would be ranked with the hype that Texas gets? Anyway, I'll ask you a tough question now.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to find a weakness in Ole Miss's roster, other than the fact that, Lane just hasn't been able to get it done against, like, solid teams.
Right,
I mean,
but the reason why...
That's what it seems.
Yes, but the reason why is what? He's been going into the games against Georgia and Alabama with not the same deck of cards.
Yeah.
Like, people want to knock him because he couldn't win in Athens. Who the hell wins in Athens right now? Like, you know what I mean?
They don't lose a lot. They lost by 35.
Gosh, yeah, he couldn't beat Kirby Smart in Georgia and Athens. He just couldn't beat Nick Saban in Alabama at Alabama. Let's knock him down a little bit. Not you. I'm saying, like, the rest of the country. That's their hesitation on Lane Kiffin. He's literally won more games in a regular season at Ole Miss, like, twice than any other coach in Ole Miss history.
Yeah.
2 of the last 3 years. With significantly less talent than the roster that he has this year. So
I know Texas lost a lot of guys, but I mean, Sark did exactly what Kiffin has never been able to do last year. He went right into Bryant-Denny Stadium and won by double digits.
Absolutely. At Texas, again, we talked about it going into last year. People were trashing anybody that said that Texas was going to be legit, etc. They turned out to be just that. And I just think that Texas lost running back 1, running back 2, lost their best defensive tackles, lost their middle linebacker, lost their 2 best wide receivers, etc. Obviously, Sark replaced a lot of those guys with good players and talent acquisition, but I don't think that he replaced those players with the equivalent of those players overall roster-wise. And if you match up Ole Miss and Texas this week and give me quarterback versus quarterback, running backs versus running back, receivers versus receivers, etc., across the board, there aren't too many positions that I'm going to give Texas the nod. Maybe a couple on the offensive line, and Anthony Hill Jr. at linebacker, and Trey Moore at defensive end. Other than that, like, the majority of across the board, head to head, I'm giving Ole Miss the nod in that game. So that's why I put Ole Miss ahead of Texas. I know just about everybody's going to have Texas ahead of Ole Miss, and that's fine. Just watch ESPN and plug Texas in ahead of them if that's what you want to do. But I just think that Ole Miss is a better football team than Texas as of right now today.
Okay. I'll give you that.
This is fun.
Number seven. I had the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and you actually had the gall to take James Franklin and Drew Aller and those guys at Penn State at number 7 ahead of the Irish.
Mm-hmm.
Explain yourself, sir.
Well, Penn State's only issue has been beating Michigan and Ohio State. And again, the last 3 or 4 years, I'm going to go ahead and say the same thing. God, James Franklin, man. I can't believe that he just couldn't beat Jim Harbaugh in Michigan and couldn't beat Ohio State. A lot of other teams were beating those teams, weren't they? No. And, I mean, they literally are waxing just about everybody else they play. Penn State is. I just don't think that sitting around and bashing Penn State because they couldn't beat Ohio State and Michigan all of a sudden just means that, again, they don't get to be considered among, again, we're comparing them to Notre Dame right now. Do I really need to go into that? That like Notre Dame in the bigger games that they've played in over the, I mean, Notre Dame has been one of the best 5 or 6, we've talked about this a lot, one of the best 5 or 6 programs in college football over the last decade. And some people won't admit that, some people will, etc. But I think that this year, that with Andy Kotelnicki coming in as the offensive coordinator, with the talent that Penn State has, and with this is the year that they've been pointing to, with year 3 in the same recruiting class of Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Abdul Carter, and that crew, like they all came in together in the 2021 recruiting class. This is the year that they've been pointing to. And I love that if Penn State and Notre Dame lined up on a neutral field week 1, call me crazy, but I think I would put my hard-earned money on. I know. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, I can't believe you're saying that.
I mean, these teams are like, it would be very close game. These teams are
very close,
mirror images of each other. I mean, new OCs. They just. I think Penn State's defense is really good. I think Notre Dame's defense is better.
Yep.
And I mean, you think of last year too. Like, yeah, I mean, Notre Dame in the big games, they're just super frustrating. Again, they were 1 second away from beating Ohio State last year. Like that's, you know, all they got to do is just not play a prevent defense on, 3rd and 18, whatever Al Golden pulled out there. And, I watched Notre Dame play Ohio State, and I watched Penn State play Ohio State. And this was last year. And I took away from that Notre Dame was better than Penn State. And I think that Notre Dame has improved their wide receivers. I think they've improved their quarterback in the aspect of it's a better fit for the offense. Mm-hmm. And also they're giving him options to throw to. Sam Hartman, as great as he was at Wake Forest, and he showed some flashes last year, he just didn't have a lot of guys to throw to. And when he did, they were freshmen. They were true freshmen. Guys like Jaden Greathouse, they had a good first couple games and then kind of hit the freshman wall, and they're going to be better. So, again, all offseason, I would worry about Notre Dame's offensive line, but I think if there's one position on Notre Dame where you have faith that they're going to figure it out, it's offensive line. So
I agree. Let me pose another question to you here. Do you think that these two teams are as close as you can get to locks to make the playoff? Both of them.
Yeah, I mean,
because of schedule. I'm not talking about just because of how good they're going to be.
Yeah,
I'm obviously including, like, a big part of it is schedule.
I will say this: stay tuned for later in the episode because I only have one of these teams in my playoff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll answer my own question. I think they are. Because I think a 10-2, depending on whatever. I think 10-2 Penn State, 10-2 Notre Dame. I'll be shocked if they don't get in. Those brands, etc. Like we talk about that a lot. Like that should not be included in that, but we all know that it is. But I think that those two teams are as close as they can get to lock. So I'm excited then when we get to that part later in this episode. All right, keep going, keep rolling.
Yeah. So consensus rankings for our ATB poll, we got Notre Dame 7 and Penn State 8. That's kind of how it shook out. So we had Texas, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State. Let's get to 9 through 12 here. We differed a lot here, and we actually We had 11 of the 12 same teams, and then we each threw in a team there that we didn't have, so we had to go past 12 to get the old tiebreaker there. But my number 9 team was actually Penn State. We've already talked about them. Who do you got at number 9?
At number 9, I have the LSU Tigers.
Woo, number 9 in that vaunted defense.
Yep. Well, good luck stopping this offense again. And I do think that with Blake Baker, that this defense, they're not going to be ranked in the 100s again, like across the board, like they were last year. They're just not. I think by scheme alone and coaches alone, with Corey Raymond back at DB coach and Bo Davis back at D-line coach and Blake Baker as the DC, like letting Harold Perkins go back to doing what Harold Perkins does best, see ball, get ball, etc. I just think that they've still got enough talent on that defense to be improved. And I think that's all they're going to need to be is improved, because I still think that Garrett Nussmeier, the best offensive line in the country, and as you and I have talked about it a lot, the receivers they've got on the weapons on offense overall, if I took LSU on a neutral field against some of these teams that I've got ranked behind them, I think LSU wins the football game.
I didn't totally exclude LSU from my rankings. I've got them at number 12, so they barely snuck in there.
Okay.
So we averaged them out, and they did fall to number 10, but our number 9 team, consensusly, ended up to be the old Utah Utes.
Our boys.
And I had them actually at number 8. You had them at number 11. So they ranked in, just ahead of LSU on the average there. So I got them at number 8 because, obviously we're huge Kyle Whittingham fans.
Yeah.
We've talked about Cam Rising for literally 365 straight days now, whether or not he's going to play, and he's finally going to play this year.
Bad.
So, yeah. And I think they're a trusted brand of football. You know what you're going to get with Utah.
Hell yeah, they are.
And, man, Utah on a neutral field against some of these teams, I think, would be severely undervalued.
I don't disagree with you, man. I would love to see it.
Yeah.
Like, the football gods need to give us a healthy Utah team in this dance, in the playoff. We need that at the end of this year. A healthy Utah team in the playoff, and let's see how they match up with these teams, because I think they do match up just fine on the line of scrimmage, etc. Cam Rising. So, yeah, dude, it hurt me a little bit to put them at 11, but I did mine by saying team A played team B, who would I take? But I totally get your point on, it's kind of like you were talking about Washington last year. Like, a lot of people kind of knocked Kalen DeBoer in Washington last year, and you were riding that bandwagon all the way to the national championship game. Yeah. You might get to do that with the Utes this year, and I might be right there with you. More on them here in a minute as well.
Yeah. So Utah slots in at our number 9 team. LSU is number 10.
Mm-hmm.
My number 10 team was actually the first team I have out of the ACC. It's our number 10 teams differ here. I got an ACC team in here. So props to us for having props to me for having every single conference represented here. But I got the Florida State Seminoles starting off the preseason ranked. I do not think that they are going to be the best team in the ACC at the end of the season. You can tune into our ACC episode last week or 2 weeks ago for that. But I just think right now, obviously they're playing in Ireland, in 5 days here, and they're going to get a severe test from Georgia Tech for sure. But Mike Norvell has built himself quite a roster there. We talked a lot about Florida State, and I know it's more than just you saying that they're getting Alabama sloppy seconds and all that, but I think they're just a solid football team, well-rounded. I don't know if they're going to be as good as last year, right? I don't know if they're going to be able to go 13-0. Yeah, so it's going to be a tougher road for them in a conference that is, looked upon as, the third or fourth best conference. So I just think Florida State's up there right now.
All right, let me ask you this. Are you not worried at all about DJU at quarterback? And
no,
are you not worried
I'm
at all?
Worried.
Okay. And all of the things that made Florida State like kind of what we talked about, those monster D tackles at Texas. That's what really made them different. That and a couple of those weapons on the perimeter were what made Texas what they were.
Yeah.
Florida State, Jared Verse, a couple of those D linemen, and those freak receivers on the outside for Florida State is what they had, just completely different than everybody else. Dude, they lost all those guys.
Yeah.
And then again, they got DJU at quarterback that up to this point, I'm more talking about me. I just haven't seen anything. I love the coaching staff at Florida State, and their roster still is very good. They're going to be a 9-3, 10-2 type football team. They could be even better than that. But it just really, I can't like hitch my wagon to DJU and all that Florida State lost this past year. I know that they brought in some solid players in the transfer portal, but again, they're not the same. Like, they're not. Malik Benson at receiver is not Keon Coleman.
Yeah.
So that's why I just didn't have them as high as you did. You did obviously, but I don't blame you for believing in Mike Norvell and this coaching staff at all, because it's one of the best staffs in the country.
Yeah, DJU, obviously, he's been inconsistent to say the least throughout his career. I mean, he was good at Oregon State last year, and we were high on the Beavers last year. Yeah. But I mean, also you got to think about it too. Like, this is going to be like his third year, like starting basically in college football. Like, you don't have a lot of quarterbacks out there who have started, 25 plus games. And yeah, I do trust the offensive coordinator, and I do trust, the coaching staff as a whole to put him and to put the rest of the players in a good decision. Whether or not that makes me a fool, I don't know. We'll see. We might see this Saturday, against Georgia Tech. A lot of people are on the Jackets. So we will see, kind of what comes of the Seminoles. But, you're not hitching your wagon to DJU, but you're hitching your wagon to another quarterback at number 10 spot, huh?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm all over that Nico Yamaleava train, dude. Again, we've talked about how Josh Heupel has, never not had a top 10 offense until last year in his entire coaching career. The weapons that Tennessee is going to have on offense, the offensive line, Nico at QB, the defensive line that they're going to have arguably the deepest defensive line in all of the SEC. This year, James Pierce coming off the edge. I think that, again, on preseason rankings that people do, if they actually just looked at this roster from Tennessee and just knowing how Josh Heupel's offenses operate, and you've got Nico, the most talented quarterback that he's ever had, with the weapons on the perimeter and the offensive line that he's going to have, dude, I just don't know how people are going to stop this team. I don't. And then on top of that, you've got a defense that is pretty solid as well. Again, I just think Tennessee, if they line up on a neutral field week 1 against the teams I've got ranked behind them, I'll take the balls in these games.
Okay. We've only got one team left to talk about, and that's a team we haven't talked about yet, and that's the defending national champions. It's been a little late in the episode, 38 minutes into the episode, and we're just now getting to Michigan. I've got them ranked number 11. You've got them ranked number 12. It slots them in at number 11 in our poll. Defense still going to be great. A lot of coaching changes, a lot of offensive changes, especially the quarterback. Hearing conflicting reports. I mean, obviously, I think Alex Orji is going to be the starter. Hearing that if they want to go 12-0, start Alex Orji. If you want to look for next year, start Davis Warren, because he's obviously the better passer. Alex Orji is the better playmaker. So if you want a chance of going 12-0, they're going to have to ride with Orji. Schedule obviously is opposite from last year. It does them no favors this year. So you get to play Texas at home, at Ohio State at the end of the year. They get Oregon at home. So, but again, with that defense, though, I think they still slot in as a top 12 team pretty consensusly.
Yeah, like I said, I had them at 12 on my own ranking. We've got them at 11 in our consensus ranking. It really came down to like 4 teams for me. It was like Michigan, Missouri, Florida State, 5 teams, Clemson and Miami. Those are the teams that it came down for me. And I just thought if those teams lined up on a neutral field week 1, that Michigan defense is still going to be nasty. And that defensive line is going to eat up front. And I still think that Michigan can run the football enough, et cetera, on the offensive side of the ball, that I just think that it would be tough for people to deal and hang with that defense right out of the gate. Of course, they're defending national champs. I'm personally not sitting there going, well, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt just because they won the national championship last year. That's not why I ranked them at 12. I'm looking at this roster with Wink Martindale they brought in as defensive coordinator and what this defense can be. And before anybody wants to talk to me about how, like, well, the quarterback, I'm in agreement 1,000%. They lost so much talent to the NFL. But I watched Michigan last year line up against really good football teams and actually not attempt passes in a half of football and still beat ass. And so I still think that Michigan, if they want to line up with this defense and Wink Martindale's defense against some of these teams that I've got ranked behind them and just let that defense eat, I still think Michigan can do that. So that's why I've got them at 12. Maybe we'll be wrong later in the year. We were kind of a little down on Michigan and compared to, some people, et cetera. But I still think that right now, I'm fine with having them where we've got them. Like, our consensus at 11, and I've got them at 12.
Okay. That's it. That's our Always Talkin Ball preseason top 12. Let's recap it. From the top, we got Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Utah, LSU, Michigan, and Tennessee gets the nod over Florida State in that 12 spot due to a tiebreaker. So, man, I love rankings. I don't like preseason rankings, but I just love any sort of rankings.
Yeah, me too. And I really enjoyed just going back and forth like we just did, kind of like giving scenarios, like what would you do, et cetera. Loved your question on the landing DeBoer stuff. We're not huge fans of the AP poll. I think a lot of people too. The coaches
better
poll.
than the coaches poll.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and a lot of people just give teams benefit of the doubts because of brands or what they did last year, etc. And they don't take into an account what they did last year. Sure, what did they actually do though in all of their games as far as like pick six previews, that game grader thing that they do. I love that.
Yeah,
that they do in that, talking about actually how the games played out. Like, you might have won the game, but you got outgained by 200 yards and the other team just dropped the football 4 times and fumbled the football. Yes, that's part of football, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other team is just definitely better. The team A is definitely better than team B, etc. Yeah. So that's why, again, preseason rankings, you shouldn't take into account schedules. You should only look at teams right now. Based off what you know with these rosters, these coaches, etc., who do you think beats who? Should be a good preseason ranking.
Okay. It's college football playoff prediction time. 1 seed, Georgia.
Yeah.
I've got, if you listen to our preview episodes for the Big Ten and everything, I've got Oregon going undefeated in the regular season, but I've got them losing to Ohio State. So I think Oregon goes into the championship game with that number 1 ranking. I think Georgia's behind them, and I think due to Georgia winning their conference and Oregon losing that conference championship game, like I think they might, Georgia gets the 1 seed, and obviously, Oregon's got to lose that championship game. So Ohio State beats them, and they get the 2 seed. You're going to have SEC, Big Ten, 1-2, no matter. I mean, that's probably a given, right?
Yeah, I think so too. And we both match up. I've got Georgia 1 and Ohio State 2. I've got, if you listen to our SEC episode, I had Georgia losing at Bama in the regular season, and then I had Georgia avenging that loss in the SEC championship game, beating Alabama in the SEC championship. So I've got Georgia 1, same thing as you. I had Ohio State losing in Eugene, and then Ohio State getting revenge in the Big Ten championship. So Ohio State 2. So we match up there.
Okay, who you got to 3?
I've got, so obviously it's ACC or Big 12, and I've got Utah at 3. I've got the Utes at 3. I do. Okay. And reason being is I've only got them losing 1 regular season game. I do. And I've got them winning the Big 12 championship, obviously, if I've got them as my 3 seed. So I would have Utah only with 1 loss in the 3 spot for me.
I think I've got Utah losing 2 games in the regular season. And so I got them in. I have them winning the Pac-12 or the Pac-12. Sorry, RIP.
RIP.
I've got them winning the Big 12, but I've got them as the 4 seed,
Okay.
and I've got Miami beating Florida State in the ACC championship game, and I've got them as the 3 seed. And so, who is your ACC champion at the 4 seed again?
Yeah, just this one, everybody's just all down on poor old Clemson and Dabo. I've got Clemson winning the ACC. I've got them beating Miami. If you check our ACC preview, I had Clemson playing Miami in the ACC championship game, and I've got Clemson in at the 4 spot, win as the ACC champ.
Okay, and so 5-6, unless it's an undefeated Notre Dame, which I don't think either one of us have, it's going to be the loser of the SEC and the Big Ten championship game. So I've got Oregon as my 5 seed, and I've got LSU because I've got them in the SEC championship game losing to Georgia. So I got them as my number 6 seed.
Look at you getting on me a minute ago about LSU's defense, and you got them all the way up as a 6 seed in the playoffs.
That's more of a schedule thing. I mean, I see that's a schedule thing. They're going to continue to just rise in the rankings for me.
Okay, okay, all right. Well, I've got Oregon as the 5 seed, and I've got Alabama as the 6 seed, and I just think that, again, I don't think Oregon's going to lose. There's a better chance that Oregon, because in these playoff projections, we are looking at schedules at this point and projecting, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I just think that Oregon has a much better chance with their schedule to run the table in the regular season and only lose in the Big Ten championship game than Alabama does with their schedule. I mean, the Tide schedule is brutal compared to Oregon's. So, again, I've got Alabama getting beat in the SEC championship game. So I would have Alabama with 2 losses in that spot. So I've got Oregon as the Big Ten runner-up as the 5 seed, and then I've got Alabama as the 6 seed.
And we'll get to it here in a second, but that Oregon in the 5 spot may not be such a bad idea for them. So
agreed.
It's a nice little consolation prize for losing that championship game. But so you got Oregon and then LSU, Bama in the 6th. I've actually got Bama in the 7th, and I'll kind of go through the rest of my rankings here real quick. But I got Bama in the 7th. I got Notre Dame 8. I've got Tennessee 9. I've got Ole Miss 10, Florida State 11, and Boise State 12. And the reason I want to do that is kind of once you give yours, I mean, we can start kind of looking at some of these matchups a little bit because if it pans out and we're Nostradamus here and one of us gets these brackets right, we'll be looking at some pretty tasty matchups.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like I said, I got Oregon at 5, Bama at 6. All right, for my 7, I've got the Irish. I've got Notre Dame at 7. In the 8 spot, I've got Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin and Hotty Toddy in the 8 spot. I've got Penn State in the 9, slotted in at 9. I've got Brian Kelly and Let the Band Play Neck and LSU at 10. And then I've got, I gotta have, Hit Your Wagon and Mario Cristobal. But hey, man, I'm buying the hype. The revival season for the Canes. I think as I got Miami losing in the ACC championship game to Clemson. I've got Miami at 11, and all I want to say on this is like when I told you about this, we didn't know each other's overall brackets necessarily before this, but I did actually mention something to Tyler before, because I had a really tough time at the 11 spot. I really wanted to put in Tennessee in the 11 spot instead of Miami, but I don't blame fan bases for this when this happens. If what we think is going to happen and what we call for happening, which is I've got Miami playing Clemson in the ACC title game. If Miami goes into that game with only 1 loss and then they lose in their conference championship game and played that extra game, and Tennessee's sitting at home with 2 losses and they both got 2 losses at that point, you would have to have, in my opinion, a significantly harder strength of schedule overall to trump somebody losing an extra game in their conference championship game to knock them out. So with that being said, that's why I said I've got Miami in the 11th spot, because I don't think that they should be punished more so than somebody else unless that other team had a significantly tougher strength of schedule. And in this scenario, if Tennessee's got 2 losses, their overall wins would not be just light years, significantly, unequivocally, whatever the words that the dumbass committee would want to use in that spot. I think that Miami would be the 11 spot in this case, so that's why I put them there. So that tells you what kind of thought actually goes into this.
Well, I agree with you if they're 11-1. I mean, what if Miami's 10-2 though, and then they lose a third game, and they get the same record after the regular season as Tennessee?
Yeah, then it would come into it have to something would have to come into the point of strength of schedule overall, and how good that if it is Clemson versus Miami, how good is Clemson? Like if is Clemson sitting there like with only one loss on the year to Georgia and they ran the table in the ACC, like those kind of things would factor in at that point. That's a good question though. I think you would have a little bit more strength of schedule, but again, I still think that the strength of schedule would have to come into play in that scenario. In my 12 seed, I've got, and for the Group of 5 squad, I've got Appalachian State as my 12 seed. I've got the old Mountaineers in Boone, North Carolina, representing the Group of 5 there in that 12 spot.
They get to go to Eugene and get their teeth kicked in, so that'll be fun. We both only have one Big 12 team in our playoff. So, again, they're going to, you match up 2 10-2 teams, or maybe Kansas State's 11-1 versus Utah 11-1. And if the same is the case with the ACC, you're going to get some arguments too, because one of those is going to get left out in favor of a stronger SEC or Big Ten team. It would be interesting to see, if it was Utah, losing to Kansas State, and Utah's 11-2, and they've got, Tennessee 10-2. They didn't play a conference championship game, and how they would do that. And I mean, you got LSU as your 10 seed, so would LSU get knocked out, or would they favor LSU? And then you'd start getting complaints, the G5 doesn't need an automatic spot, all that garbage. So it's all just fun to talk about right now. Obviously, once we get into November, it's going to be, a wild and crazy race to the playoffs, a crapshoot. But looking at some of these potential matchups, I mean, I'm looking at your 7-10 matchup. Like, man, that's real tasty. The LSU Tigers coming to South Bend. Brian Kelly coming back to South Bend and playing Notre Dame in a nice 25-degree game.
Yeah, sign me all the way up for that. Could you imagine, like Notre Dame fans, like one of the largest, like if probably the largest fan base in the entire, like on all of college football, getting Brian Kelly coming back, and all the storylines with that, Mike Denbrock, etc. That would be very tasty to see the Bengal Tigers have to travel up to the Golden Dome in December and play the Irish. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
I got a possible matchup of Tennessee heading to South Bend, and then the winner taking on Georgia. And I mentioned Oregon earlier in the 5 spot. They get the App State or Boise State or whoever, Liberty, whoever gets the 12 seed. And then they'll get, that 4 seed, which is going to be the worst Group of 5 champion. And so more so in my bracket versus yours, because, Utah versus Clemson kind of on, in people's minds, Clemson's, should be higher, should be better than Utah. But, I mean, that would game, Oregon is going to be favored over Utah in that game. Georgia's going to be favored at either Notre Dame or Tennessee, but I feel like that would be a significantly tougher game for Georgia than it would be for Oregon. And it's on a neutral field too. So it's not like they're going to Rice-Eccles Stadium and trying to win a game.
Right. Yeah. No, the 5 seed, it's going to be an interesting case study because most people agree that 5 seed is actually going to be sitting pretty with a good spot, with a very, very, very good spot, and could be an easier path overall than the 1 seed. It really could. Getting a chance to host a playoff game too. That's going to be like fantastic. And like I said, I've got in my 8-9 matchup, I've got Ole Miss playing Penn State. Penn State having to go to Oxford again, a playoff game in Oxford, the Grove, etc. Like I can smell the bourbon from here, and it's not just because it's in my glass right here either. I can smell the bourbon from the Grove all the way here in St. Louis on what that would be like if Penn State went to Ole Miss. And it'd be a rematch of the Peach Bowl last year, the Chick-fil-A Bowl last year. That would be a fantastic game. Like I said, I've got Appy State, 12 seed, going to Oregon. And, that would be Oregon matching up against Clemson in that semifinal game on my side of the bracket. Or if Ole Miss, Penn State, winner of that getting Georgia, you could have a possibility of a rematch there with Ole Miss and Georgia. But still, that'd be a solid matchup in a quarterfinal game.
Yeah, I got some tasty matchups. LSU, Florida State is always a good one.
Yep.
And then I got Alabama, Ole Miss. And people are like, oh, I don't want to rematch. Well, they're not playing in the regular season this year.
Yep.
So, but Lane Kiffin gets to get another crack at Tuscaloosa, and this time against Kalen DeBoer. He doesn't have to worry about Nick Saban on the other sideline. So,
yeah,
that'd be a good one, too. And then possible quarterfinal Bama versus Ohio State in my bracket. Possible quarterfinal of Notre Dame, Georgia. Miami, LSU. There's the possibilities of just some really good matchups. I don't know whether they turn out to be good games because we had some really good matchups in the 4-team playoff, and they didn't turn out to be really good games. So the matchups, though, on paper will look really good.
Yeah, and then for me in the 7-10, we've already talked about it, LSU having to go to the Golden Dome and to South Bend and play the Irish, and the winner of that game, LSU or Notre Dame, having to play the Buckeyes. Awesome matchup. And then Bama and Miami having to go to Tuscaloosa.
Bama going up against Kyle Whittingham. What are they going to do?
Yeah, Bama against Kyle Whittingham. We know what happened in the Sugar Bowl many years ago.
With more time to prepare, too.
Yeah.
That's the interesting case is everyone's talking about, that 5 or 6 seed getting to play the ACC or Big 12 champion, but it's would you rather have to play an extra game or do you want that bye week, right? So some people are going to have their different preferences.
Right. Agreed. But man, it just actually seeing this on a bracket, seeing these logos, seeing these teams, the possibilities of matchups, even again, me talking earlier about I was trying to decide between Tennessee or Miami in that 11 spot, and looking at some other teams as possibilities in there as well. God, this 12-team playoff, man, is going to be so much fun. It really has the potential to be incredible. But I'm glad we got to talk about some projections of our playoff and stuff, man, and no more of the previews were fun and all that. But this is when the season is here.
Yes, sir. Yep. And we appreciate you guys listening. We'll be back on Thursday. We're going to talk a little week 0. There's only a couple games. We'll get to that Florida State, Georgia Tech tilt that's going on in Ireland. We will put out later in the week on our social medias on Instagram, X, TikTok, all that stuff. We'll put all of our picks out, all of our over-under win totals, CFP projections. We're going to put it all out there. We're not afraid to do that for you guys to ridicule us and get the conversation going. So once again, we appreciate you guys listening. Don't forget to watch on YouTube and listen on Apple, Spotify, and make sure you subscribe because we will be with you all season long. So until next time.